Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this edition of Defense News Weekly, we'll see 2 new Sikorsky prototypes at the company's Florida test facility, watch Pentagon leaders be grilled on Capitol Hill, and find out the name of the Air Force's new combat rescue helicopter. With in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to this week's edition of Defense News Weekly. I'm July Toro, in for Jeff Martin, who's out this week. We've got a busy show for you as defense leaders are hitting Capitol Hill to testify about the recent defense budget request, and to no one's surprise, they're being asked some tough questions. But before we get into that, let's take a look at some headlines. Up first, the Air Force has officially announced the name of their combat rescue helicopter, the HH-60W. The helicopter will be known as the Jolly Green II, in honor of Vietnam-era rescue forces. The new helicopter is made by Sikorsky and is currently undergoing flight testing before entering service in the next few years. It will replace aging Pavehawks, which are one of the more in-demand assets the Air Force has. And the U.S. Marine Corps has ordered more new amphibious combat vehicles from BAE Systems as the vehicle moves closer to full-rate production. The version ordered is the personal carrier version, which will replace aging armored amphibious vehicles. This contract is worth $113 million and covers 26 vehicles. The Corps is currently testing them, and they're expected to enter service in the next few years. As 2020 wears on, Germany has some big decisions to make in their defense portfolio, including what new strike fighter they'll buy, what the country's Patriot replacement system will look like, and what and who will build their new heavy lift helicopter. In the fighter world, the choice appears to be between Boeing's Super Hornet and the Eurofighter Typhoon. And when it comes to the Patriot replacement, contract negotiations are still ongoing in what's been a messy program. And the helicopter competition will be between Boeing and Lockheed Martin. Stay with Defense News, and we'll keep you up to date as decisions are made. Lockheed Martin's hypersonic missile being developed for the U.S. Air Force, the air-launched rapid response weapon, is finishing its preliminary design review, which it is expected to clear by the end of the month, according to a Flight Global report. The plan is for it to be operational by 2022, and it will be carried on B-52 bombers. But this comes as the Air Force recently canceled another Lockheed Martin hypersonic program, which Lockheed calls a, quote, courageous decision. When the recent defense budget request came out, one item caught the eye of those that follow America's nuclear weapons, a new type of warhead known as a W-93. But it's not anywhere close to being fielded, as development work is just beginning. The plan is for the new warhead to replace the current arsenal of submarine-launched warheads, which will need to be replaced in the coming years. Officials stress that this will not add to the existing arsenal, just replace it. And on Capitol Hill, the Navy shipbuilding plan is facing a lot of criticism, as the service doesn't appear to be making progress towards 350 ships, despite it being a major goal of the Trump administration. In fact, there are less ships projected in the fleet right now by 2025 than there were projected by the Obama administration. And as a result, Congress isn't very happy, which means that ongoing posture hearings for the Navy aren't going to be smooth. And speaking of those posture hearings, they kicked off this week with the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, facing the House Armed Services Committee. And he was grilled over the recent diversion of procurement funds to pay for the president's border wall. Take a look.
Mr. Secretary, we are about to embark on trying to write a defense authorization bill for what would be the 59th straight year if it's signed into law. And I guess my basic question to you is it going to matter? Or will OMB send down a directive saying we don't, even though it's signed into law, authorized and appropriated, we're going to take away some money for some planes or satellites or something and move it to other things?
Mr. Thornberry, what the Congress does matters. It matters very much. And we look to the Congress as partners as we try and develop our game plan to serve the country, defend the country, and help us implement the NDS.
Well, as I've already expressed some of the concerns I have, I hope we can be partners because I think the country is stronger as a result.
As we know, there have been a lot of comments about budget predictability from Congress, and I appreciate that. I think that's the right way to go, of course. But could you tell us what funds are you planning on transferring to the wall on 2021 so that we can find a better use for those dollars now?
Thanks, Congresswoman. The funds, the sourcing would be from FY $20 that were either ahead of need or excess to need. In other words, not requested in the FY20 budget by the department.
If they if they were not requested, and if they are not important, if they're not a high priority, why are they there? And aren't there many, many more uses that we have for those dollars?
They are there because Congress put them there.
If they are there because we put them there and you didn't believe that they were important or a high priority, was there a discussion about that that you felt you couldn't change? And it seems to me that we have to be doing what's the most important. Mm-hmm. And the message that you're sending is that these projects, and some of them are critically important. Some of them involve major vehicles. The Air Force, there are so many things that have been touched by that, that it sends a message that the military doesn't need that money. How do we respond then to constituents that see us cutting out areas where we made a strong commitment not to refuel, to pay back those dollars, and yet, we're sitting here without having been involved in that decision, the transfer decision specifically.
Sure. Look, I understand what you're saying, Congresswoman. The President has determined that we have a national emergency on our southwest border. That to deal with that emergency, that we need a barrier system, that barrier system development, which is led by DHS, requires the support of DOD. And that's our role in this process, supporting DHS.
Is the southern border security in the National Defense Strategy? Homeland
Security is in the National Defense Strategy, and it's one of the things that administrations have supported in the past with regard to security of the southern border.
Because I wanted to point out that the word border only appears once in the National Defense Strategy, and it's about Russia violating sovereign borders.
Right. Homeland Security is in the National Defense Strategy. There's a lot of things we do that aren't in the National Defense Strategy. We help people during floods. We help people during hurricanes. We help put out wildfires in the West. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do that aren't always captured, but it's the nature of what we do when the nation calls upon us to support.
Well, I think that if there are areas that you know that you're going to tap for part of your strategy on the border, which is not in the National Defense Strategy, then I think that's important for Congress to know, because you're telling us that that's not very important.
Congresswoman, there's a lot of things that we do that are not in the National Defense Strategy. That's what we're trying to clean up as we do our review here with the COCOMs and with the rest of the services.
Another defense leader facing Capitol Hill this week was Army General Stephen Lyons, the commander of U.S. Transportation Command. He faced the Senate Armed Services Committee, where he discussed the air refueling shortage faced by the U.S. military. Here's what he had to say.
And what I can describe is operationally, as we bring the KC-46 on and we take on more jets and we convert more crews, when that capability is not usable and it's not today presentable to the Joint Force for some technical deficiencies, that means a dip in operational capability for the Joint Force in day-to-day operations in the active component. As if in fact we continue to retire the KC-135 and the KC-10 at the rate that was proposed by the Air Force. So we're working very, very closely with the Air Force and the Department to retain a level of capability, of legacy capability, so that you can continue to support joint operations.
So you are retaining some that you had not planned on retaining had we not had the problem with the KC-46, I assume.
So we're working with the Air Force now. There were some number of planes that were retired, were programmed for retirement in FY21, as you saw in the budget submission, that we believe must be retained. 13 KC-135s and 10 KC-10s that we believe must be retained during the conversion.
General Lyons, we've touched several times on the transition of the KC-46, but I want to put a finer point on it. In your testimony, you say this is your #1 shortfall, and you go on to say it will create a critical and deepening gap in taskable aerial refueling aircraft and aircrews for the next 5 to 7 years. You do a very good job of outlining the problem, but then at the end of your prepared remarks, you say, we recommend reevaluating aerial refueling force structure plans annually. Frankly, that doesn't reassure me. I want to know what's the plan. You've identified a serious problem here. We can't project force if we can't refuel those airplanes. And you've identified a 5 to 7 year, you characterize it as a deepening gap. What do we do? And perhaps you don't need to give me a full answer here, but for the record, I'd like to see an action plan, not just reevaluation.
Senator, we'll be happy to work with the Air Force and come back to you on that with a joint plan. In the near term, what we had agreed with the Air Force is to retain 28 legacy aircraft to mitigate the conversion for the KC-46. The KC-46, as we receive that aircraft, as the Air Force receives that aircraft, will take some time to work technical, the Cat 1 deficiencies, as well as convert crews. And so you can appreciate there's going to be tension between crews. And so in some scenarios we're tail limited, in some scenarios we're crew limited. So it's a bit of a combination. It's a very complex program for the Air Force to work. They're pushing as hard as they can with Boeing. If you could give to the committee a detailed analysis of what you identify as the gap, how many tails, how many crews, and what the solution is, because if we have a crisis and need that capacity, saying, well, we were, it was a complicated problem, isn't going to cut it. Oh, Senator, I agree. And the issue isn't when there's conflict. Actually, it's in day-to-day competition. So just to be clear, in today's day-to-day competition is where we're taking the reduction. We're stressed right now. We're stressed today, and that's where the 10 and the 13 that are in the current FY21 reduction that we're working with the Air Force and the Department to bring those back.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also, be sure to add us in Apple's News app and other platforms for the latest updates. When we come back, we'll get an up-close look at Sikorsky's offerings for the Army's future vertical lift effort. Last week, Sikorsky hosted Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy and Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth at their facility in West Palm Beach to show off the work they've been doing for the Army's future vertical lift effort. Jeff Martin was there for the demo. Here's his report.
After today's flight demonstration in West Palm Beach, Florida, Army leaders have now seen both designs in this program, both the tilt rotor that Bell is pushing and the compound design that Sikorsky and Boeing are working on. And they're not shy about saying that it's not going to be an easy decision.
I am very pleased with what industry has come in with. They certainly showed with significant investment of their own dollars last year to compete.
Right now, the Army is working on two main aviation efforts. One is the Future Attack Reconnaissance, or FARA program, to replace Kiowa Scout helicopters. There are 5 companies competing: Bell, Sikorsky, Boeing, Karam, and an AVX L3 Harris team. The other major program is the Future Long-Range Assault Aircraft, or FLRAA competition, which would replace Blackhawks that are currently in service. Now, that program is a little further behind the FARA program and is looking to see companies like Sikorsky and Boeing's team and Bell competing there. At Sikorsky's flight demo, we were able to see versions of what the company plans to offer for both competitions, as both aircraft were put through their paces in front of the crowd. One leader in attendance was Illinois Senator and former Blackhawk pilot Tammy Duckworth, who laid out what she wants to see from both programs.
Look, I love sexy aircraft as much as the next person, but at the end of the day, it's not about getting more sexy aircraft into the fleet, right? It's about getting more tools for that division commander to go out and kill the bad guys, find the bad guys and kill the bad guys, and hold the territory that we need in order to keep America safe and strong.
But there is one key issue that keeps coming up. The Army doesn't exactly have a great track record when it comes to big aircraft programs, which was addressed by Secretary Ryan McCarthy.
I think that institutionally we're very different in how we're postured with the Army Futures Command working with the ASAult. So the behavior is different, the culture is different, but institutionally those changes have been made. And to the Senator's point, we don't have a choice. We're running out of letters to upgrade the existing platforms. They're 40-year-old systems. The technology will not endure.
Well, we're going to get some clarity on what designs are going to move forward in the Army's attack reconnaissance competition a little later this year. When it comes to finding out whether or not this aircraft or Bell's V-280 Valor are going to be the Army's pick for the long-range assault aircraft competition, well, that is a few years down the road. Reporting in West Palm Beach, Jeff Martin, Defense News.
And speaking of the Army, the service's largest exercise in recent years, Defender Europe, is kicking off. It's centered around moving equipment and forces from the U.S. to Europe. And this week, when one of the brigades participating in the exercise arrived in Europe, their commander laid out what they'd be doing on the continent.
So today, what you're witnessing is a download of a 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, coming from the U.S. East Coast to the port of Bremerhaven here in Germany. And as part of that, what we're doing is really getting our equipment staged for armored movement through Germany and into Poland. I think there's a pattern of activity in Europe that really has been generated around drawing equipment or taking a little bit of the equipment that a brigade combat team might have. But we're taking all of ours. So the entire Armored Brigade combat team is coming with our personnel and equipment. So I think it's getting the people and equipment in the right place to conduct the operations and training. And that's really been, the scale of that has been something that's probably atypical of most recent deployments. And I think what we're doing here is really exercising the Army strategic readiness. So they're getting our soldiers and our equipment from the East Coast to here, which we're really a training aid for the Army to exercise the strategic mobility of the nation in large respects. Once we get here, though, now it's about us getting tactical readiness that we're building. And I think it's one of our mission essential tasks is to deploy the brigade combat team. And once we've gotten to a place, then we have to be able to fight. Exercising a full spectrum of those readiness and essential tasks now. And I think what you're going to see is us executing strategic readiness on behalf of the Army, and now coming in and being able to go after our tactical essential tasks as a brigade combat team. What we did is really focused on our fundamentals. And for us, it's maintenance, it's gunnery, it's about small unit maneuver and training. If we can do those three things well, we can go anywhere in the world and fight.
And speaking of Army exercises, the service is asking for $364 million in order to conduct a massive division-size exercise in the Pacific during the 2021 fiscal year. The event, known as Defender Pacific, would simulate many of the multi-domain concepts being worked on by the Army, such as long-range fires, electronic warfare, and others. It's also expected to be a rehearsal for deploying more forces to the Pacific. Also this week, Pentagon leaders rolled out some ethical principles for the usage of AI. And at the briefing for the rollout, they answered some questions. Here's what they had to say.
And I'm wondering if you think adopting these ethical guidelines are going to ease some of the concerns in the tech industry about working on AI applications for the military and create some space for collaboration. And if so, how is that going to benefit the work you're trying to do right now?
Yeah. We would be doing these AI ethics principles regardless of the angst in the tech industry. And sometimes I think the angst is a little hyped, but we do have people that have serious concerns about working with Department of Defense. However, we do see this as a unique opportunity to work with the tech industry and academia on a set of principles. I think that we'll find we have far more in common than we do differences. In fact, the person I chose to lead our ethics implementation plan was out on the West Coast recently with some other members of the JAIC and had some discussions with some of the biggest companies in industry. I won't name them, but I'll tell you, there was a thirst for having this discussion. First of all, they unanimously praised the DIBS work. They thought it was a very, very good piece of work. But what the team also found in talking with the big companies is nobody is very far along in this area of ethics implementation. There's been a lot of great talk about it, but everybody finds there's some challenges when you actually take principles and apply them to every aspect of the AI fielding pipeline. So I actually would like to believe this is an excellent conversation started with tech industry, and I hope it shows that we have more in common than most people might suspect by hearing some of the stories about what we did in the past with Project Maven and so on. So it's a good scene setter, the way I look at it.
Don't go away. When we come back, we'll honor the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Battle of Iwo Jima. On this week's Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack offers her latest tips.
Credit scores affect such a large part of our financial lives. Landlords use them to approve renters. Financial institutions use them to approve loans. And utility companies even use them to determine your deposit amount. It's no wonder there are so many apps out there giving you credit advice. But is it the right advice? With so much information out there, it's important you know the facts and debunk the myths to help you along your credit journey. Myth number 1, you only need to check your credit if you're applying for a loan. While some of us probably wish this was true, every consumer should be checking their score periodically throughout the year, at least once a year at the very bare minimum. But most financial institutions offer free credit scores within their app, so definitely use it. Myth number 2, the way you use your debit cards can sometimes affect your credit score. While debit cards can be a great budgeting tool, these accounts don't actually impact your credit score. It's pretty much like using cash. And myth number 3, bad credit scores last forever. Fortunately, bad credit scores can turn into great ones. You can turn it around by making smart financial decisions like paying your bills on time. Using autopay is the easiest way to make that happen. Credit scores are too important to ignore. So stick to the facts and practice great money and debt habits, and you'll be the master of your credit destiny.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com and subscribe to our early bird brief, delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start your day. And when we come back, we'll honor the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Battle of Iwo Jima. The Marine Corps has a lot of legends, but few are more striking than Woody Williams, who as a flamethrower operator earned the Medal of Honor during the invasion of Iwo Jima in 1945, and now, 75 years later, he recently spoke to Military Times about that battle. Here's what he remembers.
Well, you know, there's some memories that you would just love to eradicate from your mind and can't. And then there are other memories that you wish you could bring back, and you can't. When we got to the beach, of course, we're all down in the Higgins boat, where you can't see where you're going or what's coming up. But as soon as you hit the beach, the front of the thing goes down and everybody runs out. And I can remember running out of the Higgins boat, and on both sides of the Higgins boat were cordwood stacks of bodies. We had no place to put our dead. So the burial people, the people that collect the bodies, had rolled them in their poncho. Everybody had a poncho that you carried on the back of your pack for rain and whatever. And they'd rolled them in their poncho and just stacked them up. You know, and they were 5, 6 feet tall, just rows of them. And that memory was just never, ever go away. The sand itself, it was like, I was born and raised on a dairy farm, as I said, and it would remind me of trying to dig a hole in a hill of corn, just shelled corn. There is no way. You dig it, but it just keeps coming in because there's no foundation to it. Going across the field with no protection, we lost a tremendous number of our Marines because they had the whole field of fire already set up, and we had no protection. That's why we ran into these numerous pillboxes. There were only 12, 15 of us in that hole, and what he was trying to figure out is, where do we do now? What direction do we go? And it was in that hole that he asked me if I could use a flamethrower against some of these pillboxes. When he asked me if I could do something about, use the flamethrower for some of these pillboxes, because we just couldn't break through them. Every time we'd try, we'd lose people. I have always said, and many, many hundreds of times, that there's always fear. Anybody that tells me they were not afraid when they're being shot at I don't believe that. Life is so precious, I believe anybody being shot at has a fear. I've always said it is, the fear is there, but if fear takes over, you become useless. You can't operate under fear. It won't work.
That's all we have time for, but if you want to see and read more, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.